everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations, the show where we have conversations on an ongoing basis, which help us bring more peopleness into our workplaces. And for those of you who are fans of the show, you'll probably recognize my guest from today because his face is not new. And I'm really excited because one of the things, again, if you've attended this show once or more than once, what you know is that I believe in having ongoing conversations about the topics that matter to us so that we keep them top of mind and we can actually accomplish the things that we're looking to do. And so today we are back talking about belonging, because belonging isn't a conversation you can just have one time and then be like, I belong, or I created an organization where everyone belongs. It's not a thing. So I am here with my good friend Paul to have this conversation. No one better, in my opinion, when we're talking about belonging. Oh, as I choke on my spit, I'm so excited to have Paul back. Okay, Paul. So I want to start off with your definition of belonging, because we have some people who are new to the show who might not have heard it before, and there's many different definitions of belonging. So can you kick us off? Well, kick us off with who you are and why you care so much about belonging, and then what is belonging as the framework of what we're going to be talking about today.
Holy moly. Gosh, talk about not being prepared. Okay, so my name is Paul. I fell in love with how people belong and how it sets them free from fitting in. It removes, I call it the fit in tax. When you have to fit in, you have to be concerned about that. And then you don't get to actually give yourself fully to whatever you're going to do. And so in seeing that as a teacher from years ago, I began to watch my students literally shoot the moon, and taught in a poor area of Seattle called White Center. And it was one of those kind of an aha from a professional standpoint. And so I shifted in how to create that. And I started paying attention to what is it that actually makes us belong. You know, your typical definition is you get to be yourself, you feel valued, and so on. But you can have all that stuff and not belong. And so that's where I think the definition falls short. It might be affirmation, it might be all that other stuff. And but it's not belonging. And that's where I bring, and a good friend, Charlotte, brought up something about the choice. And this is where I'll take it. So the definition I'll use, my functional definition, even when working with companies and individuals, is you feel, own, and care for somebody in successes, dreams, and failures. And they, not so they, but and they feel, own, and care for you in your successes, dreams, and failures. And it comes down to this. It's a choice. That's why I always start with you first. Feel, own, and care, not you're passive and in a sense, a victim to the benefit or the disaster of not belonging. And I will say there is a disaster in not belonging. And if we look at our workforce, Mark Crowley cited a thing that over the last year before was 44 million people quit their jobs. Last year it was 50 million. Even with all the talk of, oh, we're going to do layoffs and there's a threat and people are supposed to be scared about losing their job, which is fair. Yeah, you can be very much, because if we lose our jobs, we can't feed our families. We can't do all that. But it's simple. We don't leave where and with whom we belong. We stay and we fight for each other. We stay and we care for each other. And this is where I go. Feel, own, care for. And those are the three elements. And if we want to be the psychosocial terms, that's the empathy, that's the taking accountability for the well-being and the goodness of somebody else's life, the owning, and the care for, which is compassion, taking an act to actually do something different. Because we all know that person who says, oh, Tracy, you're so awesome. And there's that point of like, you're my Tracy. There are other Tracy Borisons, but you're my Tracy. And then all of a sudden, here you are in a situation, and for them to show up and actually do something out of compassion, they're vacant. There's nobody there. We know then, and our belonging is suspect. And we're like, and we have that. And those three elements, if they're there, it's where we fall into the space of actually belonging, real belonging.
Oh, okay, I have a place I want to take that. But first of all, I want to welcome everyone who has shown up in the chat so far. So, hey, Ben. Hey, Sam. Thanks for joining us again this week. And Robert, always a pleasure to have you, my friend. One of the things, if anybody saw Paul's post about this right before we started, one of the things we really want to encourage everyone to do today is ask us your questions, and not just your questions about belonging, but also what are your aspirations when it comes to belonging. Hi, Andrew. Always good to see you too, my friend. What are your aspirations? Because I believe belonging has entered the conversation more and more. But what we know is that belonging doesn't happen when we just treat it like a checkbox activity. And so even when I think about this concept of like feel, own, care for, right? If if you have that just as like, okay, I have feelings that are related to this person. Okay, check. I own them to some degree because I'll say you're my coworker, right? Okay, check. You're my coworker. And then thirdly, yeah, sure, I care. If you died, that would be sad, right? And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, we did all the things. We checked the boxes of this is what it looks like to be in belonging, but we don't feel like we're in belonging. So, Paul, what are some of those things, even when we like look at a definition? Because I feel like in the corporate workspace, we're really good at like taking a hard definition and then proceduralizing it to the point where we can check a box. But how does that create shortcomings in belonging?
So this is the one of the interesting aspects, and I'll keep focusing on the feel part, which is the empathy aspect. If there's one brilliance that we have as human beings, and we get this in a split second, because our brains are made to process at 11 million bits a second to verify. Empathy can't be faked. And this is where I'll say it's not a skill, it's an attribute. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be honed and enhanced or developed, but it's not like a skill where we can do just a rote thing and do it over and over and over, and all of a sudden we're just really good at it. Because we know when, yeah, you don't care, stop it. And it's really an important thing to go to the genuine aspect that has to be in place. Teddy Roosevelt little quote: "Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And that's a legitimate thing there. And so, in that space of checkboxing, if it's disingenuous, it invalidates the whole thing. And we know that, and we're geared for that. That's the brilliance in the human. It's not the brilliance to be able to figure out whatever cool technology, like we're sitting here over this and having this fun. It's that even across this technology, we get to interact and respond almost as good as if we were sitting in a room together, and which is where it tells us. And it's in that space, and somebody just put a comment: need to create a community where differences are valued. And I'm gonna love this is a part I love. And by the way, this is why I love actually doing this with you. You are an authentic personal brand person. For somebody to be able to show up that way and get to really be themselves, and that's that space where I would put it in a space of self-belonging to get to that place. That's just as much an essential part of belonging in a company as having the us story in the company. Because the moment you lose your actual self and your authenticity and everything that comes into play, you cease belonging. And if a company's design is set to structure and rigidly stop people from being actually themselves in their differences, their uniqueness. In fact, I like to refer to it as a bunch of uniquenesses versus differences, because, I mean, you can take a difference too far. If my difference in core values violates the company core values, then that level of difference is kind of a problem. The uniqueness of somebody in it, though, that's an embracing space, and that's when somebody belongs. And when they belong and they choose then to belong, everybody, they actually belong together. And so that uniqueness in the space, and I know I just diverged off the empathy kind of aspect of it, but it has to be in play. Mm-hmm. And so checkboxing kind of ruins the whole game.
I feel like checkboxing ruins the whole game in general, because that's not, the human experience isn't tied to the checkbox, right? The task is tied to the checkbox. Is tied to the checkbox, and the human experience is not. One of the other things that Sam's point here about creating a community where differences is valued that came up for me was that, Sam, I know you, we just met, but I know you a little bit. This is a thing that's important to you, right? So when you look at, one of the things that Paul and I were speaking about just the other day was this concept of belonging agreements, right? And they're based on the things I believe, right? So Sam believes in the value of creating a community where differences are valued. There are people who believe that, and there are people who don't believe that. And so the people who you have a possibility of belonging with likely have that same belonging agreement. That I like to use the phrase collective contribution, right? Which to me is about all of the uniqueness popping and contributing. And so hence why we hang out, Sam, because it's like fun for us to talk about those things. But there's people who don't believe that. So
they fear it. They actually fear that difference.
Yeah. And so I would like to talk about this, because this is maybe one of the biggest challenging pieces of belonging in the workplace, because we all have these aspirational values, perhaps. Perhaps they're written on your wall at work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we've all really bought in to those as a belonging agreement, right? Like, this is what this looks like for me, and I agree to do this as part of my belonging in this environment. So in a state, I know you do a lot of this type of work, Paul, but when you're going from this state of, I want belonging, right? Like, this is something that I really would like to create in my organization, and that's where you're going, but where you're starting is this, a lot of people don't have self-belonging. A lot of people, we haven't even talked about belonging agreements, right? What are some of the things that need to be part of the conversation to make that transformation possible?
So for the person coming in, and by the way, Andrew just put a thing which will resonate with Ben also. Being in a community where you will be seen, heard, valued, and understood. So going into that is to find out how that's actually handled. And now you can decide if this is a place you want to belong, because that's on the receiving side of things. But the question I have is, you could go into that place and receive all that, but will you also then take that value to give all of that? And when we define belonging, it's, I got this. I would argue that the model, and I'll take this to the corporate side in a second, is it's actually not, and this is neurobiology also. When we give, we get a stronger neurochemical cocktail that reinforces giving at a higher amount oxytocin and serotonin than we do when we get. And this is just, there's been enough to show that. And so this is so that we're wired to create this communal space. Now, the workplace may not be defined as that and set up that way. It's designed for checkboxing and efficiency, which is the dehumanizing, sad part. But so if you're going to say, do I belong? It's not, do I get those things? It's, am I willing to give those things in the ebb and flow of those giving and receiving? Because it's an and space. We get both those things. The moment we keep score, we break the belonging. We turn it into transactional. And now it's all effed up. And so yeah, I
Humans
know
and
Ben,
transactional
Ben
just
and I
don't
had
really
so
go
many of
together.
these conversations. So on the aspirational side, for seeking a company out like that is to actually ask about how, I mean, I would ask, what do I have to do to belong at a company? I'm not going to ask, what do I get out of that space? Because what I'm going to find at that point is, what's the requirements to be in tribe? And now I'm going to find some of those requirements like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And I'm not going to join that tribe. I'm going to go look someplace else to win. So now on the corporate side, this is where the responsibility falls on the lion's share, on the leadership, to design a community, a tribe that clearly articulates the core of what it means to be in this tribe, and to do so in a way that a person can be fully themselves and then fully part of that tribe. And what that means is you're going to be human, and you're going to live the core values of however they're articulated, and you're going to screw it up. But the question is, will you, in the failure, come back into being in right relationship? Not right subservience, not giving up your identity, not doing that kind of stuff, but will you come back into the right relationship where this is how we do things here, the Seth Godin thing, people like us doing things like this. And that's the space that comes in. That comes into where people get to really be themselves. And this is why in the last part of the definition, I put and failure. Too many tribes are defined by and the success. And let's just face it, I'm human. I screw up. I mean, I'm pretty good at screwing up myself, actually. So that space has to be in there. Yeah, yes, givers gain. Yes, Ben. But it's that give-get space. That's how you know when you belong. And it takes time. That's the other thing. You don't just go, hey, they love me. They nerds like my nerd shirt. Oh, I belong. No, that's affirmation. I belong is, oh, those are my nerds. And now things change. Yeah.
I'm going to go. Paul has Ben has a great comment in there, and I'm going to bring it in. But one of the things that this is making me think about from like a personal branding perspective is so looking at this space of being seen and heard and valued and understood. I think the understood piece is interesting, because if you don't know enough about yourself, then there's things other people can't understand about you. And I would say in my past, and I had a lot of work environments where I felt listened to, I felt understood, I felt valued, but I didn't feel valued for something that was meaningful to me.
Okay, so there's like on the flip on the corporate side, and I will put this on corporate shoulders, leadership, which is to know somebody beyond the job description, to know them as a full human. If I just limit it to whatever marketing quota, whatever thing you're going to do, and so on, then you're going to fit it. It's literally a state of fit in.
Right.
You either fit into this productivity and whatever, and conforming channel, and that's actually going to be a state of fear all the time. If I don't measure up, I'm toast. So that whole person, and again why I like successes, dreams, and failures. Dreams being the aspirational side of things. And you can't get that unless you're actually reaching them in their personal brand story, if we're going to use that kind of language, which is what matters to them as being part of that tribe.
And it's also like, when I think about me as an individual, and my participation in the belonging is tied to my giving, right? Like, I am giving something into this. Like, I want to give something that feels like this is something uniquely Tracy can give, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just I like a good high five, right? But I'm not just walking around giving high fives. Anybody can give you a high five, right? I'm here to give uniquely of Tracy. And when I feel like, again, my corporate experience, although I had some like great teams and managers, I never felt like I was fully expressed as a employee, as a team member, because I don't know. I don't think it's part of the conversation enough. So as Ben's saying, leaders need to understand people's individual hopes, wants, fears, needs, and desires. When I entered the workforce, I don't even think that was a thing, right? Like they were just like, here's your role. Here's where we want you to grow to be. Here's the training we'll put you through to get you there, but we won't really investigate your you-ness at all.
So on what I like what Ben put in there is the fears part. I mean, to ignore that, just overcome your fear and fight through your fear. And we actually have fear for a reason. It falls into two camps. In the unbelonging space or the marginalized space, it's a fight flight sustainable thing until you can find somebody else who's also in that marginal space to coalesce to. Then you might join in belonging because that's a safer place than not. Now, if you're in your company though, and you're in a space of good belonging, all of a sudden now your fear, because we're going to fear no matter what. That's part of the wiring. Now it's fear for each other instead of fear of each other. And that's a transformational place where now we can put what we're fighting for together in first place instead of our survival in first place, individual survival in first place. And that's where having people have that space to be also a fearful human, and not have that be a penalized space. I think that's a nice add into that, because you don't usually hear that.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so one quick thing. I want to go back because Sam asked the question, is that true for everyone? And I'm not sure what you're asking, what is true about everyone. So if you can put your question in the chat again, that would be awesome. But I do think that like in business, my experience is that fear is very frowned upon. Right?
Oh. Well, under the context of you must achieve this level of productivity. Oh, you're afraid? Well, don't let that stop you. Just do it.
Mm-hmm. But there's also there's a lot of people who are afraid that if they make a mistake, then they're going to lose their job.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that, I wouldn't say that organizations do a particularly good idea of breaking down that narrative. So people continue to believe that it's true. And so we don't enter that like dangerous space, right? That vulnerable space of which really that's the space that's available then in belonging, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're not afraid to be afraid.
Well, we fear less. That's just a flat argument. I was just in a conversation with one of the execs from Softway, and they have love as a business strategy is their whole thing, and they've transformed their whole company on it, and belonging is part of their model also. And the thing is, the fear does get less. It's just that's how we're wired to have less fear in that space. And I asked the haunted house, and I said, it's really simple. Do you go to a haunted house? You go with a friend. And then all of a sudden you're still running there and you're screaming and you're scared and everything else.
I don't go to haunted houses, so
fair enough. But you don't go into a haunted house alone. Maybe some do. But the aspect that comes into play there is neurobiologically, we end up actually fearing less. The presence of somebody who is there with us helps us provided they're not also accelerating and bringing it up, in which is then it's clearly not about belonging at that point. But that space where you get together. And this is why you'll have Navy SEAL teams. They're not Navy SEAL individuals. They're part of SEAL team. The U.S. Women's World Cup soccer team. Yeah, I can guarantee you, Hope Solo, when she was playing in those games, was like, oh shit, if they score me, this is gonna suck. But she also then went to, oh, I've got to up my game. I've got to be better because I don't want to let my team down, who has had me even though I've been crazy at times. If anybody understands the U.S. Women's World Cup soccer team. But that's literally the way it's played. And so the fear comes through, and now we're in it together and we fear less. Andrew doesn't go to haunted houses either.
Yeah. It's just a bad decision.
Sam
is asking, it sounds like you are saying trust reduces fear.
Okay, so here's the thing. There's two types of trust. And this is the crazy thing. And is it Samena or Samena? I'm just curious. Okay, she can't answer me. Damn it. I want to know. So there's the trust that's predictability. That also reduces fear because now we have something that's a little more known. A little more known means less fear. Okay, but that's not the type of trust when we talk about in belonging. Belonging is actually the faith in another person, even though we know and we can't put that it's going to happen. Oh, thanks, Sam. And so that trust in somebody is a faith in someone that they're going to be there, that they're going to find a better way with you. And that's a place that changes the fear. Now, just the mere presence of somebody's face giving you a smile, crying with you, saying, I won't let you down, and being there in that space also changes the neurochemical stuff in an instant. And because that's how we're wired to make those connections. This is where in our humanness of our interactions, whether it's being there in sadness, being there in joy and celebration, being there in calm, all these things are what create the space for two humans to belong. If they're actually doing all three things. And those, I haven't found a space where you can have those fail and still have good belonging. But yeah, so it's the belonging that creates the faith and trust in another person versus a stranger. I used to do this. This was a funny one. I have a workshop on fear, belonging, and aspiration. It's a tripart state of every human. And belonging is what makes us fear less and aspire more in that space because we're with each other. But I asked somebody for their car keys, and I go, and I'm always, at the time Teslas were big. I says, "Who's got anybody got a Tesla?" "Oh, I've got a Tesla." And I go, "Oh, can I see your car keys?" And I walk over. I mean, this is pre-COVID, and I grab their car keys. And I says, "Oh, this is so cool." And I say something about a Tesla, and I put the car keys in my pocket, and I walk away. And I'm in the room with them, and they're like, because they don't have an established time base of belonging with me to go, yeah, he's just going to give me my keys back.
I think he's probably going to give me my keys
You're
back,
right.
but I'm just not really sure.
But I do that to demonstrate that it's the time back and forth together that we get. There is that trust of consistency that Sam just talked about, but the real belonging, faith in each other, is one that says, this person will never do harm to me on purpose. There might be an accident because it's part of the failure model, but they feel, own, and care for me. That's my Paul. That's my Tracy. That's my Ben in this space. There are many Bens in this world. I'm using Ben a lot because I know Ben pretty well. But that's where we shift into a better level of performance, and more importantly, in embracing of another with their full gamut of themselves, their differences. By differences, we like to think of differences as this neutral thing. No, with the difference comes either a gain and sometimes a pretty good deficit. we take a person as a whole person, and they're held in the relationship of belonging. And I'm sorry, my dog is barking.
He wants to get in the combo.
Yeah. But that's the place that changes the game, where we're in it fully. And this is where we fight for each other. That's why I'm just saying the model isn't fight or flight. I think that's wrong. Fight or flight achieves the same exact thing: self-preservation. Unite and fight is the space that's different. That's where we come together, and we do have differences, different tolerances, different resistance to things, different skills that we might develop because of something we love. That place right there, that's where one's unique individuality, and they get to be that person in the tribe, even if part of that individuality is, yeah, that dude just makes too many dumb jokes. Guilty.
He's the dumb joke guy, and sometimes we love that guy.
Yeah. It's a real change, but it requires crafting the environment to support that, because our brains do one thing: it adapts to the environment. So if the business model is a fit-in model, which is most sorry, Six Sigma people, but if you have a model system that's to remove human error primarily, you're removing also human brilliance by accident, which means you're removing a person to be their actual selves in the space.
Which by default means, are you removing belonging?
It's preventative.
Right.
It is. It really inhibits that. Now you put somebody in a space where they get to be human themselves, and even with their failures, and it's still a group that picks each other up, and it constantly excels for each other. Now you start seeing people's brilliance start going up, as opposed to just this straight line where there's a standard deviation. I mean, wouldn't you? We don't want the deviation that takes it down in the low bunch, but knowing what's driving people into that low space, which is usually, I will say it, a lack of belonging. And if you then take it and go, where are people actually striving to go to their highest abilities, and who for? And I mean, that could be your teammates, which Ben put in brothers and sisters in arms is where I'll go even with that one.
Brothers and people and sisters, people.
It doesn't even matter what
interlocked arms.
Yeah, right. Well, even if a gal I know wants to use the term "she," it's because it's not he and not she, and that's the term.
That's why I like peep.
Yeah, yeah, like a peep. Yeah, that's why you use peep. Yeah, exactly. So in that space, we're able to choose the other person in the face of all sorts of dangerous shit. And this is where it's that individual person right next to you in the fight together. Yes, Andrew, very much so. But we're doing it not because it's abstract people helping people. This is, as Tracy, this would be, I'm helping my peeps. I'm going to fight for my peeps. We get our tremendous power there. And it's not the peep that's only this way at this point in time and always fulfilling this goodness. It's the peep that forgot to call me back. It's the peep that just went through some terrible shit, and they're not at optimal performance, and they're not going to be at optimal performance because of that. That's paying attention to somebody in their absolute differences, because the differences aren't just, what you prefer, what values you might have, and what opinions you might have. It could also be what socioeconomic status you came from. It could be you're suffering from cancer. It could be or could be just maybe you have depression. I mean, there's so many different things here that come into play. When we belong, we bring them to matter in how we're going through. I was just talking with somebody who said that when he went to the social event and actually heard his employees talking about the shit they were going through at home, he now was in a position to say, hey, team, we have one of our members that's having a tough time. And if you'd like to share, I'd let him share. And we will pick up the paces while he is dealing with this.
Hashtag unite and fight.
Right. So, but it is that individual space where you're actually looking at the full individual that you get that.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to something that Ben had commented about in terms of leaders, right? So this is in relationship to the fear piece that we were talking about.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's a lot of leaders who think it's their job, part of their job, to create belonging, and then somehow their belonging doesn't participate, right? Like they're not participating in the belonging.
Well, look at the design factors of 100 years of business design and MBA classes. Power control, reduce risk, everything else. And it's removing the identity of a person so they have the conformity for the job. And even like now with the talk, because belonging is much more popular to talk about. You got the CEO, it doesn't matter what. They've been put in a position and they may have an expectation that they have to do this kind of show for this kind of thing, because if they have any kind of weakness showing, then they'll fall prey to something. And I mean, the irony is it works against the human connection to be invulnerable. It makes you unapproachable. It makes you unrelatable. And these are all those aspects that come into play. But more importantly, by refusing to show that vulnerability, you're saying, I don't trust you to have me in my being human. And that breaks how tough and how hard somebody, to use the term that people like right now, the resilience that somebody will have for you. It changes. But yeah, and it's sadly, it's still part of the main design of most companies. This is where, and I gotta share this. Love as a Business Strategy by Muhammad Anwar and Jeff Ma, and oh gosh, I can't remember the two other names. Chris and Frank are the other two editors, or four authors. Unbelievably beautiful book. And he actually goes through the transformation of his company of being a command and control. Tracy, if you read this book, you're going to be like, oh God, I could never work for this guy. And he vulnerably goes through and reveals the whole transformation that they went through in this book and why he went there and got there. So I think it's the kind of story that would allow other senior leaders to read and go, oh, so this can be done, and we can be incredibly successful in a loving business environment, which accepts people and brings people in. Of course, they're choosing to be part of that tribe and unite and fight together. Even when Muhammad, while he believed in it and he did it, that didn't mean he was going to be good at it from the outset.
Right.
Which meant he had to be vulnerable in that space. And they had to belong and choose him still in that trajectory. So that it's a marvelous book. As a matter of fact, my recent post about forgiveness, I was so enamored with forgiveness as one of their pillars in their company, aka failure and belonging. It requires forgiveness. It's such a marvelous book, but it can be done. We can create a business place that truly creates belonging and the performance that comes with it. Because, like I say, you lose the fit-in tax. So if you belong, you know somebody has your back. And in the foxhole of business life, and yeah, I know that's a military reference, but there are businesses that are wanting to put your business out of business. They'd rather see you lose and them win than have you both win.
It's like my grandma trying to beat my dad at the board game and constantly losing because all she's focusing on is beating my dad.
But
Don't
yeah,
like
so
examples.
but it's to that point, that vulnerable place. And it wasn't before. It was designed. If you were vulnerable before, the sharks ate you. This is actually, I'll call it progress. We can actually look and say, look, we can actually have a sit here and have a serious discussion about belonging and the implications for real high performing people who really get to be themselves without the fit in tax. That was not a conversation that happened very well, even 5 years ago. Vulnerability in leadership. We're actually getting to that place, and that's a much better place to be.
Yeah. Oh man, okay. There's some good stuff happening in the chat. So Brian was sharing conditioning to conformity, rather unity and connecting. That's kind of the like power and control model. I think that more and more we're talking about it, so we get the opportunity to move into a more productive conversation. Andrew brings up a great point about people moving into leadership because they're good at their job, but people are not taught how to be leaders. And I think this is just really, I mean, when we talk about leadership training, there's a lot of like generic things that go in there, right? Like communication. Communication isn't a bad thing, right? Like listening skills and all those things, it's good. But if we're not taking those actions in a, Andrew's talking about being authentic or an empathetic way, like how those skills are used to build belonging.
So this is a really cool thing. This is why one of the things, and I know Brian is aware of the Bob Chapman story, "Everybody Matters," with Barry Waymiller. So when Barry Waymiller chose to take care, and Ben, don't freak out, I'm going to use the term family because Barry Waymiller uses the term family. They look at their employees more like family, and not dysfunctional family, but caring family. Every employee is somebody's mother, father, son, or daughter, and so on. And what they did is, as they figured out their way to belong and actually care. So Bob Chapman was asked to basically lay off like a third of the company, and he said no. Instead, he chose to work with and listen to his company, to really communicate and listen, because listening is part of communicating, to find a way to get through the economic downturn, and not fire or lay off people. So in the process of learning this, they then created Barry Waymiller U, the place where their type of leadership would be taught internally with the divergence and all this stuff, because they acquired a ton of companies, but to create a good space to unify together. And so if a company is going to go through and create that way, then they have the ways they belong plus the ways they get, I'll say it, stuff done. Not my normal. I know, sorry.
It doesn't sound like Paul.
I know, sorry. Okay, the ways you belong plus the ways you get shit done. That's your company culture. And it's that simple. So they figured out a way to create the ways where people get to be themselves and also be in a good us story. But that's a perfect example of how a business doesn't have to fall in the old traditional path of command and control and risk mitigation. Instead, it's how you actually get better, which actually removes the need for risk mitigation. It is a thank goodness. It really is.
Well, and I think that one of the things that sometimes from a business perspective, people think is that because historically these types of corporate structures have been based on the command and control perspective, that that's the only way to build a business, right? And this is why it's so important for these types of conversations to start to permeate more arenas, because it just gives us the opportunity to say, like, there is something different that we can do here. There's something different that has worked for organizations, right? So it's not like we're out here pretending that belonging, well, we're not pretending belonging is awesome, but that like belong, because it is, but it's not like this isn't proven at all, and we don't know that this has any kind of business relevance to at all. And the thing is, I always think about optimal team performance as if it's a championship sports team. Right? I am an athlete. I can't really help it. And it's about like people, like you go. I have taken charges in basketball from people who are almost double my size because I am in it for the team. Because
yeah. Well, actually, so but this is that like, even like there's predictable trust. Nobody ever says, I'm going to take the charge because I trust something is a certain way. They do it because they're going to go into harm's way for their team. Mm-hmm. And that's like same thing with, nobody ever said, well, I did that because I was psychologically safe. And now psychological safety is important, because if you don't have it, it is a complete inhibitor of doing things, but it's not what makes us do things. That's you going, I want my team to win the game. Oh, damn. That's what that is.
But it's also like me thinking, this is a contribution that I can make in this moment that can help my team win the game. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes I get a concussion.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one I regret a little bit, but it is what it is. Yeah, I know there's good stuff happening in the chat. Right? Or Ben is saying things about the ideal 1950s family, which I think is like Leave It to Beaver style.
Yeah. Again, I gotta say, I like. This is a cool paradigm shift. What if we moved towards a family that was like today's style, and as opposed to 1950s Leave It to Beaver, it was, or Father Knows Best, because that was there in the other
Mom
one. Okay, I'm old enough to know that one. What if it was the family that went through incredible hardship? Maybe and I will say, because it's common, the father was absent, but the mom was able to keep and hold the children close with high vows, with also very high standards, that we will take care of each other, and I'm willing to sacrifice for my children to get to a better place. What if we take that as just a snapshot of a family to say, that's our business family?
Well, and I think the interesting thing for me with the family scenario is that you don't choose your family. Okay? And if we're saying that choosing is a part of belonging, then
there's a little harder
relationship is dependent on me choosing you. But that doesn't mean you can't choose your family, right? Like, by blood and by nature, you haven't chosen them, but you can choose them, right? You can choose to be friends with your sisters. There's lots of people who choose not to be friends with their sisters, which is also fine, because it's your choice, right? So I think to me, that comes back to the choice. And one of the examples I'm just thinking of is, there's a gentleman that I was actually on a show with earlier today, and he has a business, and his two sons are part of the business, and he has a third son who wants to be part of the business. And they're choosing to be in business together. They're not doing business together just because they're a family. They're choosing because this person has this strength, this person has this strength. Together we can like do all the things we want to do. And I just really love coming back to that like choice piece, because even I want to address this quickly, because Andrew's talking about people getting smarter, and when they're looking for employment, they're researching cultures and researching the manager. And this is something that I talk about so often in the like interviewing process, is that this is an opportunity for you to learn if you want to choose this
yes.
organization. And people treat it like, because of the power dynamic, right?
Uh-huh.
People are just like, I'm just being interviewed and they're going to decide if I'm worthy to join the team. But that's not a formula for belonging.
No, but where is it? Oh God. Okay, I want to
there's-
say it right because I can't even remember my own writing. Shit. Okay, here's what it comes down to since I can't find it, so I'm paraphrasing. I use the term self-belonging, not belonging with yourself, but actual self-belonging. And the reason I say that is, in belonging, you have to choose you also. And so just in that same thing of, do I choose them to work for? You can't say, well, I'm applying for them, so I'm choosing them. No, you're going to find out. Yeah, maybe not. And I have a person I know just now just said, yeah, I did not take the job offer. I said, nope, I can't do it. I saw writing on the wall and I went, all right, you chose you. And there, you can't belong unless you choose you also.
Mhm.
And we miss that.
Yeah. And it's, that's the thing. And again, I just think that, like, for a long time, and I went to business school, right? In business school, they teach you how to interview well, which means impressing the people who you're interviewing. And it has absolutely, actually, I should bring this blog back because it's probably like almost 2 years ago now that I wrote it. But I wrote this article about, Forbes had an article about the 28 ways to climb the corporate ladder. And at least 14 of them were in direct competition with, I called it owning your personal brand at the time, but really this is about self-belonging, right? Like, I can't possibly self-belong if I'm prioritizing these things, because now I'm prioritizing pleasing my manager instead of actually exploring what's important to me. And at the end of the day, belonging doesn't exist in a one-way relationship.
It doesn't,
exists two-way.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting element, and it ties in. Ben wrote, like everything else, it comes down to the definitions and how that story is told, and then retold. And this is where I like where this is going, because we're always in a continual retelling story, because we run up against things, we make mistakes, and sometimes the dynamics of everything that's around aren't going to support it. And so I'm going to take this into the self-belonging space, which is the story we tell ourselves and retell ourselves. That's the story we live. And so if we're telling a story of, I have to be this way in order to succeed in this space, and I'm not me anymore, that's actually the story that says I'm not enough unless I fit in this space. And that's a distinct that's a disadvantage in your own performance and what your potential is, because now you've just governed the crap out of yourself to prevent it. I remember I was talking with somebody, this is a year and a half ago, and they said, well, you need to, and because I was looking at joining their company, and they asked some questions like, well, you need to make sure that they don't know how to remove any of the dates on your resume, remove this, like that. I said, well, because I can't be a near 60-year-old white male. I mean, and so on. And literally was told, well, you kind of are the face of the enemy. And I went, ouch. But here it was from the onset, I was being told I had to hide me. And I'm just like, well, if that's the case, I don't work there.
Oh man, did you see my post? I got this again. I signed up for Forbes things because they're a respectable business information source. And I got this email, and in every email, it has like here's three good things you can do to whatever. And I can't remember if it was number 1 and number 2 or number 2 and number 3, but these two things were like right up against each other. The first one talked about being unique and like owning your story. And then the second one was like, but if you have a career gap, make sure you hide it.
Right.
And I was like, I'm sorry, I failed to see how you can do both of these things at the same time. Because how are you owning your story if you have a career gap? And this is relevant for a lot of women, right? Because we take time out to raise a family. And Like, I left corporate because of my son, not so I could stay at home full time, because God bless those mothers who do that. I don't know how you do that. But I wanted to have space to be able to do that while he's little, because he's only little once. And it wasn't available for me in corporate, so I created it elsewhere. But I'm not ashamed of that decision.
Yeah.
I would go and I'd be like, this is part of my story. If you see it as a career gap, then that is fine, but I don't, right? I see it as a career decision. And if we don't agree on that, then this is one of my belonging agreements, right?
Right. That's okay. And we had a chat on this the other day, and it's about, if you have, and this is expectations versus agreements. Expectations outside of agreement are really problematic for belonging, because they're a one-way, fearful place that you think you're going to be into, that you must comply with, which is different than an agreement. Because in an agreement space, you're like, yeah, I agree to be this way and to do this kind of thing. And that, from the neurobiology, our brains shift when we actually come into agreement to do things for making things happen towards that agreement, versus an unstated agreement or no agreement, where there's an expectation to deliver at that point. Since we don't get the clarity in any of the communication going back and forth that we're doing, as we're even trying to do something together, we start going, oh shit, how am I gonna, I'm supposed to do that? Well, I have this, and this going on. I can't get to that. The thing with an agreement, what you'll do is you'll go like, I'm in an agreement to do this. And because the agreement's in place, you'll all of a sudden go into the communication path of, I realize this is what we're shooting for. There is no possible way I can do it with all 7 of these things. 4 of these got to go so we can get these things. And you stay in agreement, or in the relationship space, which is much more easy to then keep belonging in play. And it's a whole different place. So I think that aspect, when you brought up the word agreement in there, helping people get into that space, even with themselves, like I'll do this, but you're doing it out of a fear place, not a self-belonging place. Is, I'm agreeing to do this for this much time. I'm going to take a break because I'm going to spend time with my beautiful child. And maybe I'll jump back into the corporate world later. But my agreement now is with myself to be this way and go forward, which is a different thing of, I should be this and I should be thating, when you could be in agreement in that space, self-agreement.
And I think this is a good place for us to stop, because otherwise we'll keep talking all day, which isn't bad. It's very good, but also I need to eat at some point. This is the thing, and I've never really considered it a self-agreement before, but this is the thing that actually on an ongoing basis stops me from looking at jobs and applying for jobs, is because I look at it and I'm like, oh, this says I'm required to work 8 hours a day. Boop. No, because I won't do that right now. It doesn't work with how I want to contribute. I don't think it's related to how I can contribute. And so if that's a hard thing, then we are not in agreement on that. And I think this is something I think is a great challenge for everybody. Well, okay, can you send me some sushi for lunch? If you're gonna send me lunch, send me sushi. Although from where you're at, you're not gonna have, like, Paul could send me sushi. It'll be
it's not gonna be fresh sushi at this point by the time it gets there.
And it's just like, these are things that can help us stay in self-belonging with ourselves, so belonging with others is available.
Okay, wait, there's a statement here at the end. I am fascinated but somewhat confused. I gotta hear. I want to know why.
If you have more framework on that, Sam, please let us know. But one of the things I want, so we have a fairly simple definition of belonging, right? Like, we feel, own, care for someone else in their successes. And how do you say it, Paul? You say
successes, dreams, and failures.
Dreams and failures.
Yeah.
And likewise, flip-flopped with other people. I accept them and they accept me with that contract.
Yeah.
And the thing that is maybe confusing with everything is that the human experience is complex, right? So how a leader is experiencing this versus how an employee is experiencing this versus how a team of employees experiences it. The thing that creates complexity in any kind of group is that no two people are experiencing belonging on the same checklist, right?
Yeah. Right.
But what belonging is based off of is where are those places where we belong, where we can get on the same team to say, like my example again, we're going for a championship basketball team. Our strategy is to run the crap out of every other team that we play. So what does that mean? I run the crap out of myself every day. So I have the best endurance and the best cardio that we can experience, right?
Okay. So how about this? Hey Sam, I don't think we've met, or maybe we have. The name kind of looks familiar, but if you would like, feel free to reach out to me and we can noodle a bit. If it's relating to Tracy, then reach out to Tracy and noodle on.
I think Sam and I already have some more time on the calendar to do
Okay.
things. But I would highly recommend that everybody connect with Paul. That's a good way to wrap up. Paul, where's the best place for people to find you? If they want to noodle
on the LinkedIn side, you can just go ahead and DM me and we'll get connected there. If you want to email me, it's paul@heartbasedleading.com. Reference this wonderful show, and that'll let me know what this is at least relative to from the email standpoint. And I'm happy to connect up.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I was super prepared, I would have had that in a thing, so you could write it down, but I don't. So you can either find it on LinkedIn or ask me. I have Paul's email address, so we can get everybody hooked up. Because the whole point of this conversation is that this is an ongoing conversation. It's not meant to be a thing that we just figure out in an hour, right? It would be great if it was, except it's not.
Shit, no.
Right? You guys don't even know. I probably should keep track of like how often do I have a conversation with Paul and how many hours of belonging conversation have we had. And there's just always more to learn. There's more to explore. There's complexities in personal brands, and there's complexities in the interrelation and the brand culture and all of it.
Well, just even look at this list of comments and the different layers of insight that'll come into play here. I mean, I'm looking at these different things that are coming through and going, and then there's also different depths of belonging between people. There are people that you'll have the feel and care for that, you'll jump in front of a bus for, and then you'll be those that you won't. And maybe there's a couple you might push in front of the bus, but that's not belonging though.
I was going to say, I don't know that falls in under the umbrella.
Yeah, I know. Right. But, I mean, this is that whole space where the belonging is kind of, it's a choice and discovered, and it's even unique to the people involved. And this is why one company's type of belonging can't be mimicked by another company's. We just know that for us to be human and belong, we do have these requirements for and of each other, because otherwise we don't belong. We don't say that's my Tracy. Like you hear somebody talk about blank and you, oh, I know them. That's when you say, oh, I know them, with that uptick and the speech and everything, you're saying that's my person. I know them. And that's a different space than who the hell's that? Because that one's not in your belonging. And
I would extrapolate that to, like, there are people who I have worked for the same company for, and like, so we're both employees of this company, but like, I don't know you, right? And it's not that you're bad, like you might be great, right? But I don't know you, so I don't have belonging with you.
Right. And they may never have set a set of ways to belong in the company that would foster and nudge people into that space, because you can't force people into that space either.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, we should probably
we're gonna wrap it up for today, but you can stay tuned for more conversations about belonging from Tracy and Paul. So get connected. One of the other things for those of you, I think most of you have been in a conversation with me before, at least those of you in the chat. If you were in the chat today, this is awesome. This is you adding your voice to the conversation. And the other people who are in the chat today are also people who are interested in having belonging conversations. So if you're looking a way to authentically grow your connections with people who care about the same things as you, then this is a great list of people to connect with. So you don't just have to have belonging conversations with Tracy and Paul. You can also have belonging conversations with lots of different people with lots of different perspectives, because that's what gives us more space to understand how is belonging being perceived among other people. So connect with each other, stay in the conversation, and until next time, everybody, permission to do you.